Hey everybody, welcome back to Finding Korea, a Where We Find Home series. I'm Katie, a Korean adoptee, and I've spent most of my life not thinking very much about that. Until now. The series is about what it means to come back to something, a culture, a language, an identity that was always technically yours, but never quite felt that way. I don't have the answers, I'm not even sure if I have the right questions yet. It'll be personal episodes where I share my feelings and also talk to guest experts along the way. And today I'm chatting with one of those really smart people. Cory Lemke is a Korean adoptee, a linguist, and someone who spent years living in Korea in reunion with his birth family and now researching a question that I genuinely hadn't thought of before. What if the Korean language never fully left us? Like, what if it's still in there somewhere? That opens up a whole conversation about language, identity, and what it means to belong to something that you're only just beginning to understand. What does it mean to claim an identity versus to inherit one? And what can a language hold that conversation can't? Even if you're not a linguistics nerd, this is still a very juicy conversation. So let's go. Hey, Cory, welcome to the
Hey,
podcast.
thank you. Thanks
Thank
for
you for
having
being
me.
here. Can you introduce yourself and tell everyone a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. Yeah, my name is Cory Lemke, and my Korean name is Ha Wundo, but I like only use it with my birth family because I guess some of my Korean friends use it too, but it's like an old man's name. So like my friends were joking. It's like if somebody named you Elvis, like unironically, right? Like, and you just like went by Elvis. I think it's kind of an equivalent sort of situation, but that's what I have. And yeah, I'm a linguist. So I am finishing up my PhD at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, and I'm sort of looking at long-term language retention in adoptees and basically, do we have any psychological retention of our birth languages in our brains, which a lot of people, I'm so blessed. There's a lot of people that are very interested in this question, and I'm very fortunate to get to research that and present things on those topics. So that takes up most of my time. So I kind of split the year. I'm half in Korea and I'm half in Illinois. My partner's here and I'm in reunion. So I try to come back to Korea as often as I can. And I lived here for about 10 years before I started the PhD. Yeah, so I'm still like learning things every day, right? I feel comfortable in Korea now and I'm getting better at Korean and I feel comfortable having conversations with people, but I feel so stupid. I mean, I'm stupid in the States too, so like I have no, like I don't think it's a language problem anymore. So, but yeah, that's a little about me and what I do and a little about my life.
Yeah, that's so cool and really, really interesting. I love languages. And so just, yeah, nerding out about where they come from, what it means culturally, what it means like for us, for others, communication, just like in general. I think all of that is extremely interesting. So I'm really excited to talk to you. How did you end up at Champaign-Urbana?
Great question. Well, the backstory is right. I was here. I was like one of those people that just like, I don't know what I want. I'm just gonna go to Korea. I'm gonna teach English, and I did that, and I like found my birth family. Like I was like switching to the visa. I didn't even intend to. It wasn't like this big thing about finding my birth family or whatever. It was literally like I was applying for the F4 visa, and you have to go to the adoption agency and get your paperwork. And when I was there, they were like, "Oh, do you like want to do a birth family search?" And I'm like, "Okay, sure." And like the next day, they were on the phone and they were like, "Yeah, we found them." And like, so I went down a couple months, and then I actually lived with them for like 2.5 years down in Jeonju. Yeah, like not in the same house, but like we were in the same like apartment complex. And I have a ton of cousins and I like lived with them. So I was working down there. I was teaching English at a university, and then I was like in reunion with my birth family, and I just started kind of picking up Korean. Like I didn't really formally study it. Like it was like coming back. So coming back, I know now, like as a researcher, but at that time I was like, because and the reason I say it was coming back was I actually studied Chinese as an undergrad, which is another just really difficult language, right? I just love learning hard languages. And so I had like a Department of Defense scholarship. I had like a lot of advantageous conditions to learn Mandarin, right? Versus Korean, which was really, I was just like here. And so after I moved back to Seoul, I was going to take a Korean class just formally. I was like, it's time. and I took the test and they placed me in like upper intermediate and I'm like I can't write anything. Like I just you know. So that's what started the questions of like, okay, is there something like this isn't this, comparing my experience with learning Chinese with what this is, I think there might be something. So that's how I started looking at PhD programs. I met my partner who is a speaker of the Jeju language and it's endangered and so had all these like linguistics questions and then I got into Illinois. My advisor there, I have two advisors actually. One's Korean and then one is she's like a lady from Argentina. But we do like heritage, yeah.
I lived in Argentina
We
for
do like
5 years, so I love
oh,
Argentina.
okay. Yeah, it's a great culture. So I'm very blessed that I get to work with them as well. They're, experts in what we do and stuff like that. And they're great mentors and helping me figure out what's going on there. So now I'm at UIUC and love the cornfields and living that life now. So
That's too funny. I mean, yeah, that is not relevant or important to really anybody else but me. I just, since I'm from Illinois, like I just like
right.
have a lot of connections to U of I, and so it just was a very big coincidence when I saw
Mm,
your email address. It's like, oh,
right, right.
so yeah, very exciting. Okay, so yeah,
Mhm.
that's really cool. And I again, this is like a little bit off topic, but I was wondering your experience a little with Mandarin. I went to China as my first like solo travel experience, and
Okay.
I don't know why I chose China. But it was the first time that like I was traveling in a country where it was pretty tough to get by without speaking the language. And so
Mm,
since people from the US can have like a 10-year visa, I was like, great, I'm gonna like learn some Mandarin. I'm gonna go back. It's also gonna look good on my resume. Like this will be helpful for a lot of life things. And I
mhm,
started learning Mandarin and was just having a tough time because of the tones. The
mhm,
sounds would come out of my mouth and they would be the sounds that like people make when they make racist comments towards Asians. And I was just having like a ton of trauma like around that I had
mhm,
no idea was like kind of in my head or that was gonna happen. And I had to stop and I was
mhm.
like, I'm gonna come back to this later. I need some therapy first, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like a thing. I don't have like a good sociological term for this, but like if and I have some good friends at UIUC who are Chinese adoptees actually, and they've done the opposite thing where they started learning Korean first. Um, and I think it's like a thing where like, for at least for me, like learning Chinese, it wasn't quite Korean. It was like still compartmental. It was safe, right? Like I'm still learning a foreign language. I'm not getting into it. And I think it's the same thing. Like it's like getting adjacent, but not like having to deal with your emotions and sitting with that and what heritage language learning means for us as adopted people. So I think on some subconscious level, that's probably why I chose Mandarin. But I like was it was like 2000 we were getting ready for the Olympics, the '08 Olympics, right? Everything was about China then. So and I was like, oh, if I want to learn Korean later, it'll help me there or whatever. So but I have no regrets learning it either. I have a lot of great friends and been to China many times. I love the country. But, I think for me, it was like I realized at some point, like I can pinpoint, like I was on the street, like eating street food with my friend. And I was like, I'm kind of done with this. Like, I'm not the country, not China, but like, I'm not learning about my culture and my heritage and like myself and my story. And that's really what I want. And so I was supposed to do like another year in China and do like a capstone and internship. But I like went back and I don't think the US government was happy with that. But like I went back, I like graduated on time instead of doing that extra year. And then I like moved to Korea a couple months later and the rest is history now. So
Yeah, that's amazing. And it's that's really interesting. I'm kind of going through something kind of similar now.
mm,
Like I came to Kazakhstan to improve my Russian and I
mm,
got here and I was like, I don't know. Like I just it's a cool language. Kazakhstan's great. Also, Russian's great, Russian people and the country, politics and stuff aside. But like,
yeah.
I like a ton of stuff about it, but I think it's been me just like stalling to get to
Mm,
Korean, and especially starting this project and stuff. I am finding myself more and more ready to dive into that. I was looking at
mhm,
the levels of I don't know if the CAA created it, like how hard languages are to learn for native English speakers, and there's like 5 levels.
Hmm.
First is like the Romance languages and stuff, and then Russian is in level 4, and I have been struggling with Russian, and then I was looking, and Korean is level 5, and it's like, oh, cool, 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 cool. So it's gonna be harder.
Oh yeah, yeah. Korean is it's a tough one, but Russian. I mean, Russian's hard too. Like, it's a lot of like movement verb stuff in Russian. So
Oh my God, don't get
complicated.
me started on those. But
Yeah.
anyway, yeah, so actually back to like what we originally were here to talk to. I could talk to you forever about languages. So what does retention actually look like, in the brain? And I know that you're not finished with this at all, so I know that this is kind of a work in progress.
Yeah.
But yeah, kind of with all the information you have now, kind of what have you been finding?
Yeah, great question. Um we don't know. I always give this metaphor to like people is like I feel a bit like an archaeologist, right? Like I'm digging in the minds of adoptees and seeing, and I think it's a pretty apt metaphor. It's like we found a bone, we've dug in the ground a little bit, and there's a bone there, but we don't know how big the bone is. We don't know how deep the bone is. We don't know if it's part of something else. We just know that there is a bone there. And I think that's really the case with what we're finding in our lab with adoptee language retention is we know there is something there. Adoptee minds are not processing language in the same ways that like control groups are. We know there is some sort of advantage there, but we don't know of what. We don't know why those things might be retained, those pieces of language, and we don't know to what extent and what is influencing that. So, I mean, we're really just trying to even establish that there is a bone there, but we it's pretty robust now that we know that there is something there. So now we kind of have to do the hard work of like piece by piece. So it's like, well, you're like a language person, right? Like, so there's the phonology, of course, there's the lexicon, the vocabulary, there's the grammar, there's the pragmatic level, but then there's smaller levels as well, right? Like there's individual sounds that we might have sensitivities to. There's the prosody or like the intonation and the stress. And that's really all very interesting. So I think that's what we're trying to find. We're like trying to find what pieces of the language are still left in our brains and what we might have sensitivities to. And so, for many, many years, most of the research has actually been done. There's like 5 studies on this topic, and that's not many, right? But most of it has come from Europe. And we really still don't know how to research this sucker because it's so subtle. It's like a sensitivity to a sound that doesn't exist in English or something. So that's where we're headed. We're trying to figure out what are the correct methods to do that, to dig deeper, to figure out if there's anything there. And it's a really interesting question because it goes back to the core of what I think linguistics is. This question of, is language like an innate part of the brain, or is it just a part of general cognition? Is it nature or is it nurture? And I think we as adoptees can really answer a lot of those questions. And it's really exciting work. So I feel very blessed that I get to do it every day and share it and think about this. So
Yeah, well, and I think it's really, well, first of all, fascinating. I also can imagine just how tough it is because I'm sure it depends on factors. Talking to one adoptee who has a totally different experience than another adoptee who spent X amount of time in their birth country versus in their new
mhm.
country. What language was the birth language versus what language they grew up with? Because all of those, I imagine, play a little bit of a role and the sounds and just and everything. And so that also just like has to be tough having like so many variables.
Mhm.
Are you really only looking for birth language, or like does this also apply to whether or not, if you're born into one language, grew up natively speaking a different language, whether or not that helps people learn other languages in general better? Or that is a totally separate topic.
Yeah, no, that is definitely I have a colleague in my lab who works on that. It's like the third language studies. It's
Mhm.
becoming more and more. I fancy myself as like a pure bilingualism researcher. And I don't even know if I identify that way. It's really more like I'm interested in first language and second language and how they might interact and influence each other. But yes, I mean that is it's a really interesting question about how these two languages of bilingualism, how that might impact the processing or learning or the usage of a third language? And does it depend on the dyad of the languages themselves? What is that interaction? And, so there's a lot of questions there with third language stuff. But yeah, and then there's a question, I mean, just generally, like, does bilingualism confer just greater cognitive advantage? Are we smarter because we're on some level bilingual? Maybe. I don't know. It's a very big question still. So we'll see. I guess people are doing work. Lots to be done in linguistics.
Oh man, yeah, that's so interesting. And like, how does it feel to study something academically that also is, personally related to you and,
Mhm.
your life experience?
Yeah, I think it like really it's both challenging and both rewarding. It's challenging in the sense that like I have a personal investment in these questions and right. So I am constantly asking myself like am I like one of those evil scientists that's like trying to like move results in a certain, like um I still try to be very objective, right? Like as a scientist, but it has impact, a material impact on our lives, like whether or not we discover retention of our birth languages, that has impacts on the way people are constructing their stories and what they believe about their connection to their biological families and things like that. So it's both. And I think I'm learning. I'm blessed that there's scholars before me who have come and who have done similar things, right? That have had similar emotions with this and their research intersects and things like that. And they're very good role models and mentors. I'm very, very happy that I know them and, they kind of help me along that path. But we will see. I mean, it's very exciting. It feels like a lot of pressure sometimes because it's like there's not any other adoptee linguists that I know. Well, that's not true. There are some. There's not that many like in my subfield. There are like other linguists who do like classroom stuff who are adopted and things like that. So it's both challenging and rewarding. That's what I'll say.
Have you found stuff kind of about maybe yourself that has surprised you that you didn't think would come up kind of as you've been doing the academic side of it and you're like, oh, like this is an unexplored thing like about me or
Mm.
something like that's happened to you or
Yeah, I mean, I think the more and more I get into it, like linguistics is a very broad field, right? So there's like, I mean, some people are doing computational stuff, right? And trying to figure out questions of AI and, how that's different. And some people look at literally the grammar and like try to figure out what are the rules of this system. And I'm more of a psycholinguist, right? So I look at the language in the brain and how it's processed. But the deeper and deeper I get into doing psycholinguistics and looking at human cognition, the more and more I realize how much this is all very, very socio as well. So I have a very good friend who does sociolinguistics and things like that. And we have a lot of good conversations about that. But I feel myself moving in that direction as well. And there's our individual languages in our brains and our consciousness, but then, how we interact with people and the power dynamics and all of that. I'm still very, very much learning about. And a lot of those questions come up, especially as a Korean learner, right? Like I'm taking Korean classes and that is difficult. I think navigating my identity in the classroom as a researcher, as an adoptee, as somebody who's lived in Korea. And I think there's very, very big questions there still that we need to kind of. I've heard it described, I haven't experienced this, but I've heard it described as language trauma, like in the classroom with learning our birth languages. And so I have been reflecting on that question in my own Korean classes. Like, what would that look like? What is that? How does that feel? I mean, I feel things, of course, in my own learning, but I'm kind of moving in that direction as well with my research. I'm very, very interested in that. Are there ways that Korean teachers might be inadvertently excluding us from Korean identity in the classroom as they're teaching us Korean?
do you have an
And
example of like what kind of that would look like or
yeah, so like some of the research in sociolinguistics is concerned with discourse management, discourse analysis, right? So a quick example would be like in a textbook, they might say like Korean people eat rice cakes for the Lunar New Year, something like that, right? Like a very innocuous, seemingly innocuous statement, right? But that sentence is inadvertently excluding us as adopted people, right? If you didn't grow up eating rice cakes as a cultural practice in your home, you're confronted with the question, am I Korean? Right? Or Korean people have to do these cultural things in order to produce their identities, which we know, of course, is not the case. So I think, yeah, that shows that like they're not aware that they are excluding. And a lot of this research has been done actually by other diasporic populations of whatever language. So, they say the same things, right? They're like, we don't do that, but does that mean I'm not Korean? Does that mean I'm not a Spanish speaker? Does that mean I'm not a legitimate whatever? So yeah, I think a lot about that question. How do we create a pedagogy, a language learning pedagogy, not just for us, but for our children as well, who are going to be grappling with the same questions of identity in the classroom and cultural navigation in a, global world or post-global world, one might say. But so I think a lot about that and yeah, how we're constructing identity in the language classroom and what choices we're making as adoptees to include or exclude ourselves within that identity and such. So it's very interesting as well. So
Yeah, like as you're talking about that, so I speak Spanish and Italian, and
Mhm.
I'm a person. I need like classrooms, I need homework, I need a very like structured setting. I could never just like go somewhere and like pick it up. And so yeah, very much like textbooks and stuff. And obviously like part of that is culture. I've like lived in Argentina and Italy, and obviously none of the identity stuff came up for me because well, before I like didn't identify as Argentine or Italian. Now I like kind of do. Like after living
Right.
there, after speaking the language and adapting to a lot of the cultural stuff,
Hmm.
like there is a part of me that does identify as both of
Hmm.
those cultures, which is it's not weird, like it makes sense, but also I don't have like the connection of having any family members there or kind of any part of like my blood or any sort of anything like that. And that
Hmm.
is, I mean, it gets kind of like the opposite of what you're saying, but like a really just interesting thing about identity and how we connect to it. And so that's actually probably good for me to know going into learning Korean.
Hmm.
That like maybe that will come up in the opposite way where they're telling me like this is how it should be. So like in Italian and Spanish, I was like, oh great, well I'm gonna be like that. Like I'm gonna
Hmm.
eat the empanada or like whatever, and that's
Hmm.
gonna help me like feel that way. But it's kind of opposite in this way where you're telling me this thing that I already am and have part of my identity, but like, but don't, do that.
Hmm.
So I have never, ever, ever thought about that before. And that's like
Hmm.
really, really interesting.
Yeah, I've heard also people like, well, like the family lesson when they're teaching you kinship terms and things like that in any language, where like it's always a lesson in the textbook, but it's obviously for us a very, very heavy topic.
Mm.
Um, but I think for me it was the same. So, I was learning Korean while I was like in reunion, and like mom and oma are like two different people actually for me, right? Like like I would never call my American mom oma. So there's all these questions where like do we call like in Koreans will say like 형, 누나, 오빠, you know, 언니, right? To describe their friends, right? Like it means brother, sister, right? There's a lot of kinship terms and things like that. Do we use those? Do we, and how do we feel when we're in reunion and we're using these terms to describe basically strangers? At least they were for me. Like it felt like we're blood related, but like, I don't know you, like if I pass you on the street, I'd have no idea, right? Like, but
Right.
then do I call you Kyung? And then like what does that mean? And like no one teaches you that. No one teaches you how to be in reunion in a Korean language class. And so there's a lot of questions, there's a lot of research that needs to be done. And it seems kind of like a niche thing, but for Korean language education, it's really not. Because at one point there was a scholar at the University of Minnesota who gave a really, really interesting interview in one of the big Korean language journals in the United States. And he said at one point their program at the University of Minnesota was comprised about 50% was adoptees.
Oh,
And there is not a single adopted character in any of the extant Korean language, but maybe I'm wrong. But the ones that I've looked at, the major ones of the universities here in Korea and the major publication used in the United States to teach Korean, there is not a single adopted character, despite 200,000 of us being adopted abroad.
wow.
I think that says a lot about our positioning within and who they're envisioning in the classroom, and we are clearly not it. And as a language educator, right, like teach English, we think about these things. We want to create spaces where our students feel included, right? Like, I mean, that's what we're doing. We're trying to include them into a new society through language and empower them to use language to further build their identities and things like that. So if we're not even representing them in a textbook, and the text that we're using in our classroom, what does that say about the overarching ideologies about how we see them as learners? So I don't know. It's just a feeling I have at this stage, but I think we need more research. We need more activism there to ensure that we are included, and what is the best way to teach us as a community, and, big questions, but a
Yeah.
lot of ones.
Well, representation is a theme that I feel like keeps coming up for me as well. Like even just in pop culture, like, there are Asians on TV from Asia. There are Asians on
Hmm.
TV that are like children of immigrants and have, those struggles that are different. And then I have like never seen an Asian that was adopted and raised by a white family and like the struggles that that person may or may not have. And so even in just like wider culture, like that also isn't a thing. um
Hmm.
and like, what you were saying about like the words and stuff, and I mean obviously, you understand how important language is, and even not even crossing over into another language, just like in your own language,
Hmm.
how I think we take for granted, I know we take for granted certain things, like saying, and I mostly think about this in terms of gender, or like when I have these conversations, a lot of that is how a lot of other people can relate. But saying like he, just like automatic assuming like a doctor is going to be like a he, like that stuff goes into people's brains, and it's it's getting better now, and but there's a bajillion of those that
Hmm.
happen across race, culture, just identity, gender, things like that, and just showing like how important language really is, even if it's well, with people's pronouns, and with even just small like prepositions or things like that, like it does
Hmm.
make a huge difference. And then obviously you cross over to like multiple languages, and I'm sure it just like exponentially changes as well. So
Totally. In a very real way, I, we are the languages that we speak. And I don't mean language like, oh, you speak English, you're an English person. I mean, we actively construct our identities through the tool of language, right? Like, this is not how I sound when I'm out, like, with my friends, right? Like, when I'm out we're having like a Friday night, or like, I do not sound this way. Like, I don't know. I've heard I sound more masculine when I go into professional. Like, it goes down, right? Like, I do things with my voice. It's like a lower timbre. But when I'm out with my friends, it's like much higher pitch, right? So, I mean, just even that, right? It's like we really signal who we are at any given moment from the words we're saying, the sentences we're constructing, the stories we're telling about ourselves and the people that are in our lives and things like that. And yeah, you're right. Like, I mean, people say that, right? Like, do you feel like a different person in different languages? Like when you're in Spanish or when you're in Italian, do you have a different personality?
100%. And not a totally different person, but I definitely have a different personality. Some of it just comes from like confidence and stuff, but some of it's like
Mhm.
cultural. Like I am a little bit sassier in Italian than I am in English, and I'm a little bit more direct in Spanish because coming from the Midwest, we're very passive aggressive people. And so my English personality is that, but like, Argentines are they're polite, but they are direct. And so like they are not afraid to tell you like, excuse me, the line is actually like, back there, and you're like cutting the line. Where like in Spanish, I like that is less of a problem for me to say, whereas in English I'd be like, oh my God, like what do I do in this situation? This is horrible. Like, and now everyone hates me because I didn't say something. Like there's a whole dialogue that goes on there that doesn't happen to me in Spanish as much
Mhm.
because they're fine with it.
Mhm.
I'm well, whatever. I'm like funnier in English, but just because I have a little bit more depth of language and stuff. But
Yeah.
yeah, I absolutely have different personalities
Hmm.
in different languages. Again, all
For sure.
like core. I'm the core. Like my values and stuff are obviously the
Mhm.
same. But yeah, there are definitely things here and there. And then Russian, I'm
Hmm.
very timid, but my Russian is not good. That is also why. Because there's also, that when you're like learning a language and you're just like, I am just trying to survive here, man. Like,
I just need eggs,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely, yeah. But there definitely are confines, I think, of the language itself to like, I mean, Yeah, it's hard to give like a concrete example, but I mean, Korean makes you like conjugate based on social relations with people, right? So like you're
Mm.
constantly thinking about that, right? Like you're constantly like, who is this person to me? What am I to them? And how do I, and I just don't think about that when I'm in the States as much, and certainly probably
Well, we
impacts
don't
my
have that
personality.
level of formality or like
Mhm.
respect. Like, certainly there are respectful ways to like say stuff, but I feel like that's more like intonation than it
Mhm.
is. Like, you're not going to conjugate a verb a specific way when you're talking to someone.
Right. For sure.
And that comes up for me in both Spanish and Italian a lot as well, because
Hmm.
I've lived in places that are pretty informal. And
Hmm.
so they don't use like the most formal, even when they're talking to like their doctor or something, like certainly not their grandma and their doctor, they use the informal, and they're kind of offended if you use the formal because it is so formal to them.
Right.
So I learned it that way. And then you go to places where it's much more formal and you're like, oh no.
Right.
I mean, I get a little bit of a pass. Like, I'm not like a native speaker and they like understand that. So I think it's probably not that big of a deal, but I do think about that, and it's really hard to make the switch because it just like didn't learn it that way, and it
Oh,
just
we're the same way, right? Like it's like I mean, I think Americans are much less formal than like British people, right? Like I going to the UK is so weird to me where we're like Miss, like I'm like, no, call me Corey. I'm Mr. Blah 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 is my father, like
yeah, 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 yeah.
yeah. So even within the same language, right? Like yeah, like what you're saying is so right. It's so interesting, I think. But
I get embarrassed in the UK to say my name because I'll introduce myself as Katie, because with the US accent we pronounce the T like in the middle of a word as like a D, and then
uh
they're to retain my name they'll just like repeat it back, oh, like Katie, like nice to meet you. I'm like, yeah, no, you said it better. Like yeah. And
Which is right.
so it's just funny, just yeah, even like little things like that.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, for sure.
And so, kind of like we were talking about, but like, do you feel like you can have language and identity as separate, or you kind of do feel like they come as a packaged deal?
Yeah, I think it's a package deal,
Yeah.
even at the beginning levels. I mean, I think we're less aware of it, and you like you said, we're just trying to get by. But yeah, I mean, the story. What did they say? Like, I think most languages have like a proverb about like, be careful what you say, or be careful what you hit your words you hit your blah 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 to, or I think like in Korean, I saw a TikTok recently. It was like mari tanda, what you say becomes, because it's really true, right?
Hmm.
Like what we say about ourselves is really what we believe about ourselves, and that is who we are in a very real way. If identity is a social construct, then language is the primary tool through which that is socially constructed, right? It has to be. So that's kind of a scary thought, but it's also kind of exciting, right? Because, ooh, that means you really can be whatever you want
Yeah.
through what
Yeah.
you're saying.
Yeah.
So it's also very empowering. So
Have you
yeah.
found like your relationship with your like birth family has changed as your Korean has improved, or like I mean, I guess that's maybe is like an obvious question, but like how has it changed, or like what differences have you seen, and maybe even just like yourself?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to know, like, if it's like the language getting better or if I've just like grown up or like, like any of those things. But yeah, I mean, any adopted person I really recommend. So you just don't know. Like I really wasn't like, I need to go find my birth family. But it just kind of fell on my lap. And I'm so happy, and I'm so, my life has been so enriched by having them in my life. And so fortunate to be able to build a relationship with them. I think the biggest thing for me is like listening, like learning how to listen. Like I'm an extroverted person in English, but like when you can't language and you just have to like listen to people talk at you, it's a change of like worldview. I think like
Yeah.
you're like, oh my God, wow. But I remember there was like a very specific like moment where I was like pretending to sleep because I was like Koreaned out, right? I was like, I just need like a mental break. And I was laying on my family's like floor, because Koreans sit on the floor, right? And they're talking about like the story, my adoption story, like to each other. And I'm picking up bits and pieces of it. But I realized in that moment, like, I have to learn Korean better because, like, they're not going to write it down. They're not even going to always tell me. If I want to know about this story, like, I have to be able to use this language. And I have to be able to listen to this language. And it's often not like in my first reunion with them, we were at the like orphanage with a social worker, and they gave like the rough sketch, but that's never good enough. Like even with a translation, like you just never get all the details. Like you get the rough story, the timeline, but you don't want to know. You already know that, right? Like it's mostly like in your paper. Well, in my case, it was in the paperwork. But what you want to know is like, okay, but what were they thinking? Like, what was my mom thinking when that was happening? What was my dad thinking? What were they doing? You know, and that never comes out in the main story. It's always in later conversations.
Yeah, of course, you're not just
And
gonna pull up to the orphanage and be like, well, and like have that conversation. That would be yeah.
right, right. You're like, okay, but what were you wearing when I was conceived? You know, like just stupid stuff like that. Or like, what my
Yeah.
grandfather has passed away, right? He passed away in 2005 or whatever. I want to know what grandpa was like. And the only way I'm going to be able to learn that is through their stories about him, right? But you better know enough Korean to understand their stories. So going back to your question, it doesn't really need to be said, but as I've learned more Korean, the stories have gotten richer and I've learned a lot more and I've learned a lot more of the nuance and who they are as people, and their personalities and what they're using language for and how they're using it to be who they are. So, um, yeah, I mean, if anyone has like any slight interest in ever like just even visiting their adoptive country, I really start with the language ASAP, because it takes time. It's what a category 5 language you said?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Five out,
Oh,
out
get
of
on it.
five. Yeah.
Yeah. But you know Kazakh too, right? Some Kazakh, it's like pretty similar.
I do not. I do not.
Oh, okay.
I've also been very intentional about not learning Kazakh because if I ever say something in Kazakh, they think that I'm Kazakh. They think that I'm Kazakh anyway.
Right.
But if I were to say anything in Kazakh, they would like speak to me because I'm like, oh no. And then they'll switch to Russian and then I'm like, oh, still no.
Well, that I didn't. Yeah, I didn't realize, but like, yeah, I think like maybe Spanish plus Korean equals Kazakh.
Really?
Yeah, kind of. You kind of have this like that when you say like you were like lived in Argentina. I'm like, oh, that makes it. You give like Spanish teacher vibes, but then you're like, oh, I'm a Korean adoptee. I'm like, oh, okay, you're Korean. But the amalgamation of those two things, I do think, yeah, equals Kazakh.
That's funny. That's really funny. And I didn't know for coming here that Kazakh and Turkish are come from the same family. So like Kazakhs can speak to kind of like how Spanish people, Spanish and Italians can speak their own language like at each other and like have but in their own languages and still communicate.
Hmm.
Like Kazakhs and Turks can do that too, which is like so
Hmm.
random. I mean, obviously it's not random, like it comes from somewhere, but like it feels really random.
Uh-huh. Right. Yeah. Like why don't? Yeah. But Central Asia, right?
Yeah.
Horses.
So, what is your relationship to Korea now? You say you spent half your time there, but so how has that shifted and what does it mean to you now?
I go back and forth with this. Like, I mean, we have a lot of identities within these diasporic spaces to play around with. And I don't mean this to be like I'm special or whatever, but like, I don't really feel Korean American. I feel Korean and American, if
Oh, I
that makes
love that.
sense.
I love that distinction.
I don't feel Korean hyphen American because that's its own thing. And I have lovely, lovely Korean hyphen American friends, and they're doing their own wonderful things with figuring out what Korean means to them and what America means to them and how they're dynamically both. But I don't really, yeah, I feel like when I come back to Korea and I'm like, in my hometown on the ancestral mountain, and it quite literally is an ancestral mountain. Like there are like generations of my ancestors buried on this mountain.
Wow.
How are you gonna say that's like, oh, you're not Korean? You know, you can't help but not have some sort of spiritual something there. Like, oh my God, this is like 18 generation. Like the people at the top of this mountain are from what is it like 800 years? You know, like I don't know. It's just it's wild to me. But then I also really like football.
Yeah.
So it's really, and I like love football. Like I love watching college football, and a Korean person like does not generally do that, right? So, yeah, I think they're both home, and we don't really have to choose. And I think that's the beauty of this story is that we can have both.
Hmm.
It takes a lot of work, but it takes a lot of flights, and but you know, you get used to it. You get your little kosher meal on the flight, and so yeah, I feel Korean and American is what I would say to them.
I am going to think a lot about that because I've never thought about it like that. And I think it is a really important distinction to make.
Mhm.
I mean, currently, I really don't feel Korean pretty much at all.
Mhm.
Just like the fact that my face looks like this and then people like talk to me about it. Um,
Mhm.
Currently, that is where I'm at. So I'm like really at the beginning. But I
Mhm.
pretty much like this week decided to put a pin in Russian and like move forward with Korean. So yeah, that's like very exciting.
It is. And it's done, it changes like at any given, with my partner, it's like he's from Jeju, so like when I'm with him, like I'm just like American. Like it's not even like you know, but like when I'm in Champagne, people are like, "No, you're super Korean." Like, and I'm like, I can't do the Korean food here because it's like terrible. And it is. It's like it's not good, and so in any given situation, it just really depends on the context. But yeah, I'm very excited to see your journey as well, like how everyone comes here and makes Korea, how they fit it into their own story and things like that. So,
Thanks. Yeah, I do think that's also a really good point too, depending on like who you're with and the barometer on where you're at. Or I guess that's not the right word, but like yeah, who you're with changes like how Korean you feel because when you're with a bunch of white people, like obviously you're like quote unquote way more Korean. And
mhm.
then you're in Korea and you're like, oh no, like so much less. And then you walk into maybe a Korean restaurant. I mean, this has happened to me before, walking into like a Korean restaurant in like Peru, and you're like,
Mhm.
well. I'm more Korean than like the white people here. I'm less Korean than the Koreans that are here.
Uh-huh.
I also like I speak Spanish, so I'm more like I'm closer to the people who can speak Spanish here than maybe I'm the Koreans. So this is very confusing.
Mhm. Mhm.
Uh,
It is. It is. And I think the best conversations for me happen with Korean hyphen Americans because like I mean they're asking themselves the same things and yeah, there's a lot of productive conversations to be had with other diasporic Koreans. So, yeah.
I didn't know. So I get asked a lot here, where are you from? And they're like, oh, but like, where are you really from? Or where you're like, nah, what's your basically why do you look like this? And then I say like I was adopted in Korea. And when I'm in the States or in Europe or whatever, and people say like, oh, North Korea, South Korea, I'm just like, okay, come on. Like that's a very obnoxious question. But I get that a
Mhm.
lot here because there's a ton of North Koreans who escaped through to Russia and then have made their way into Kazakhstan. And so I would also just like love to learn, well, either Russian or Korean to be able to speak to them because that is so interesting and just like I had no idea that there was such a huge diaspora of North Korean. I mean, Koreans, I think, like in general, but I think specifically North Koreans. So you go to the markets and there's kimchi and a bunch of fermented stuff, all the
Mhm.
banchan and stuff that they sell by the kilo
Mhm.
because there's so many people. And so that's been really cool and something that I'd like to explore a little bit more here because I've never experienced
That's
that.
so cool. On that point, it's like there's so many ways to be Korean. Like even within Korea, right? Like I know like we're in this era where Korea is trying to like export an image about itself, but like I love going to my hometown because we have foods there that you go to Busan and they are like, I don't even know what that is. Right? Like, it's very regional, but like, right, like the North Koreans and the defectors that are here, they're like, our Korean food is not like this, right, at all. So even just those three examples, like there are within the peninsula itself, there are just so many different ways to be Korean that I think that nuance gets a little lost abroad outside of Korea because they're trying to present this one essentialist version of Korea. But that's what I love about being in Korea. It's like discovering all of the different ways of the shades of being Korean, whether that's food or whatever vice you're looking for. But it is just such an interesting place to be to discover heritage. And then I think at some point you realize, oh my God, there's really no heritage. It's like what I want to create. And then you start playing ukulele or something, you start creating. But yeah, no, it's a lovely place to be. It's like, if people have the means, if they have the time, I definitely recommend coming to Korea and trying to figure out what it means,
Well,
yourself.
Corey, thank you so much. This has been such a fascinating conversation. I don't know, do you want like people to be able to reach
Ooh,
out to you or
yeah, totally. Let's see. On Instagram, I'm at adoptee linguist. So if people want to check me out there, I like don't post all that often, but the things I do post, I think people are kind of interested in. So, but yeah, find me there and looking forward to seeing people out in the world and at conferences and things like that. And do reach out if you have questions about language or learning language, heritage language. Happy to help.
Yeah. All right. Well, yes, that's very, very exciting. And yeah, thank you so much for chatting today.
Thank you.
Man, I could nerd out on that stuff all day. But I really loved a few points that he made, especially being both Korean and American and not Korean American. I'm definitely going to keep thinking about that one. Make sure to subscribe to the channel because you're not going to want to miss the next episode. We are staying in the world of language, where I sit down with Hyunwoo Sun, the founder of Talk to Me in Korean, which is one of the biggest Korean language learning platforms in the world. And we talk a little bit more specifically about the Korean language and its nuances. So you're not going to want to miss that. Also, don't forget, I've got a Substack where we find home, where I dig deeper into some of these concepts through my writing. But also it's just kind of a diary entry and just like a peek into my brain about not just Korea stuff, but about personal stuff, random ruminations, things like that. I'd love to have you there. And then make sure to follow on Instagram. I'll have Cory and all of my information down below as well. And see you back here next week. Bye.